Welcome to the second episode of this series, What IVF Clinics Don't Tell You, brought to you by the Eggsperts. We're a team of medical researchers who dedicate our efforts to investigating the mysteries of infertility, from womb to tomb. My name's Lachlan, and I'll be hosting this series. I'm joined by Alex. Hello, Alex.
Hey.
Alex also has a series on plastics and fertility and has featured some really great guests. So,
Being specifically
including
the expert Lachlan.
Including myself. So stick around. It's really good. So in our last episode, we talked about some of the different fertility treatments that are out there, like IVF and ICSI. And today we're going to dive a little bit deeper and look at the trends we're seeing in IVF clinics around the world. What's improving, what isn't, and where are these technologies heading? We'll also explore how the use of these treatments has changed over time and what the success rates really tell us. Infertility now affects roughly 1 in 6 people globally, making it a significant worldwide health issue. And consequently, many individuals are turning to assisted reproductive technologies to help achieve pregnancy. So when people think they might want to consider something like IVF, one of the first steps is to find the right clinic. This might start with something as simple as a Google search of clinics in the area, and depending on where you live, you might be hit with a ton of options, each one showcasing its own unique advantages or services and trying to position itself as the top choice. A lot of clinics are able to offer some statistics on their rates of success, and looking through some of the statistics offered on some of these websites, you'd think that infertility is something that can be relatively easily overcome with the use of assistive technology. But one thing that isn't always made clear to people going through the process is what some of these statistics actually mean. How is success defined, and are some of these success rates oversold? If you've ever had a look at some IVF websites, something you might have come across as a selling point is metrics such as fertilization rate. Often that can be a really high number, upwards of 90%, which might make you think it's a great company with way higher success rates than others. But in reality, this only tells us the number of eggs that are fertilized in the clinic after they're collected. It doesn't tell us anything about whether people undergoing IVF actually fall pregnant, and beyond that, how many actually go on to give birth.
So true. To that fertilization statistic that you mentioned, that clinics will also choose what data they're actually presenting there. So like that might be 90% of eggs that have been retrieved versus like 90% of patients that get retrieved eggs, not 90% of patients that start the cycle. Like there are lots of people that also don't even get to that egg retrieval phase. So they definitely chop and change and mold their statistics to make their business look better, because that's what it is, it's a business.
And those, like when you say the egg retrieval stage, are you saying they just don't get a sufficient number of eggs so they don't continue the remainder of the process?
Yeah, so like a cycle being initiated, that person might respond poorly to the hormones for whatever reason, like because there are lots of different hormone protocols, and then like maybe their ovaries don't respond sufficiently to the hormones, so they can't go through the egg retrieval process, or they go through the egg retrieval process and then they don't get enough. Like, yeah, there's a number of things there.
A clinic website might choose whichever metrics make their success rates look most favourable. For instance, some clinics exclude certain patients from their stats, such as older patients or those using specific types of procedures, such as frozen or donor samples, which can make their reported success rates a bit higher than what they would be for the full population. And that's where things can get a bit murky, because IVF success isn't a single number. It's a whole journey made up of many steps, from egg collection to fertilization, to embryo development, to implantation, to pregnancy, and then finally a live birth. So it's easy for clinics to choose which of these steps to spotlight depending on what looks most impressive to potential patients. So when we talk about success, it's really important to ask success for who and at what stage of the process. The reality is that success can be oversold, and people starting IVF might not realize how tough the journey can be. That's why honesty matters, because IVF and other fertility treatments aren't a medical treatment in the traditional sense. It's also a product that clinics are selling. Up to this point, the fertility industry has mostly been left to regulate itself, rather than being held to strict evidence-based guidelines about which treatments are actually needed. But there's growing concern that this approach has allowed too many unproven and often expensive treatments to slip through. In addition to traditional IVF and ICSI procedures, clinics offer optional add-ons that offer improved outcomes. But the reality of these benefits might not be what you think. Be sure to tune into future episodes to hear more on those. There's a lot of information out there on how successful IVF and other assisted reproductive technologies are, and much of that comes down to the variety of techniques available. These include IVF and ICSI, different fertilization options such as using fresh or frozen eggs and embryos, and using one's own eggs versus donor eggs, as well as the person's age at the time of treatment. And each of these involves a range of factors that can influence success, so it's hard to give a single percentage that covers everyone's circumstances. So IVF and other procedures have been around since the 70s, and it's come a long way in terms of its uptake and perception in society since that time. How much do you imagine IVF success has increased in, say, the last 20 years? You'd be forgiven for thinking that we've gotten better at these technologies in that time. But the reality is, we've actually hit a wall in rates of success. Of course, there's a number of factors contributing to success. But if we take out some of those factors and instead focus on the success rate of people using their own eggs that have not previously been frozen, the live birth rate is only about 18%, and it's been that way for roughly 20 years.
That percentage is including people under the age of 35, and like currently in almost every country, the majority of patients are over 35. I also just wanted to add, and you can slot this in wherever, we have had improvements in the actual like methodologies and techniques and approaches, and like IVF treatment is a lot safer now than it used to be. We have like, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, we don't transfer multiple embryos anymore. We do single embryo transfer, so it reduces people's risk of like multiple pregnancy, having twins or triplets. And so it's much safer in that regard. There's lots of things that have improved, but Lachlan's point still stands of if you're trying to have a baby, it's still the same success rate.
Yeah. Of course, everybody's individual circumstances and experience with ART will be different, and there's a number of factors that contribute to this number. However, it's rare to find information from clinics that openly share these challenges or provide context around their success rates. So beyond the success stats that you see on clinic websites, there's actually a national registry known as ANZARD that keeps track of everything IVF related. It brings together data from across Australia and New Zealand, tracking things like how many cycles are being done, what kinds of technologies are being used, among other details, giving a much clearer picture of what's really happening and what is successful in terms of IVF, not just what clinics choose to highlight.
And our previously uploaded episode that was hosted by Jessie, another one of the Eggsperts that I was on, she highlighted that our ANZARD reporting is actually, we've been doing our ART reporting for the longest out of any other countries in the world. And I can also add that it is of the highest quality out of all of the other countries in the world. So we are really leaders in that space. Good for us.
Interesting. That was actually my next point.
Wow. And I don't even have the script. But go on.
Yeah. I was just going to say that there are dozens of countries now that release varying levels of public data on IVF and related technologies, which allows us to give a global view of how these techniques are evolving and being used around the world. God, I wonder if anyone's had a look at all of those side by side.
God, I wonder what nerd would do that?
It would be such a big task as well. It would just be
it'd be such a huge effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shouldn't take too long. Beyond what we see in Australia, there's also the question of global access, particularly in developing countries, where assisted reproductive technologies are still becoming more widely available. IVF uptake is probably not so surprisingly increasing in a lot of countries. Today, global ART uptake is almost 8 times higher than it was 30 years ago. And as a result, right now, one ART baby is conceived every 35 seconds. So by the time you finish listening to this episode, dozens of new babies will have been conceived through IVF or related technology. But with cases of infertility and ART uptake continuously on the rise, along with plateaued rates of success, can ART continue to keep up with global demands? Traditional IVF, while it was the first type of assisted reproductive technology to be widely rolled out, doesn't always meet the needs of people's fertility treatments. And this demand has led to a really interesting trend, which is the rise of ICSI.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh no! But with cases of infertility and ART uptake continuously on the rise, along with plateauing rates of success, can ART continue to keep up with global demands?
So true. And on that note, more broadly, like the trends in society that we're seeing with fertility is that people are not only finding it harder to have babies, but they're just not trying as much to have babies. So we're having less babies being born, that now in a lot of westernized countries are below our replacement rates of what's needed to maintain our population size, which I know the concern for a lot of people is like overpopulation, global warming, but actually reducing our population past a certain point is very detrimental to like the very nature of our society, i.e. it will collapse if we don't have enough people to support society. And so pretty much the UN has done a bunch of projections, and they've also highlighted the key like barriers to people having kids. But essentially the projections show that we may see our population as a whole start to decline by 2050, so that's only 25 years away, and it will be substantially, like considerably declining by 2100. In that, I mean, we are already, even if we don't know it, we are actually already starting to feel the effects of that because we have an aging population. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of like the population pyramid changes, and then as we go further that will become more and more apparent. So yes, the question is, can ART keep up with that? Like, it'll be interesting to see.
I guess if part of the issue is that people just don't want to have children, then fertility isn't really the issue.
Well, that's only one part of it though. Mm-hmm. So to talk to those 5 things that the UN says, the first and foremost, it's actually not that people don't want to have kids, it's the economic barriers. Mm-hmm. So it's like financial, being able to have a stable job, being able to have stable parental leave and childcare. That's the number one reason. Second, and then the other reasons, like another main one is health, so infertility. Another one is not being able to find a suitable partner. Another one is concerns about the future. Yeah. And then the other one is not wanting to have kids. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty interesting.
A lot to tackle.
I wanted to say, because you mentioned that like, yeah, in a lot of developing countries, the access is still on the rise because there like aren't heaps of fertility clinics in those places yet. But I would say like even fertility care, like it's not really seen as an equivalently important part of healthcare in any country. So even in like well-developed countries with good healthcare, like not that many countries actually have very good access to IVF or ART clinics. Mm-hmm. And that's still increasing a lot. As a result of the population issues, governments are now changing their policies to make it easier for people to access them. Mm-hmm. So a really good example is Japan. because if you look at a curve of their population, it's messed up. Like they are having heaps of issues with that. So they've actually over time been giving more and more subsidies to IVF, and now going through ART, like as far as I'm aware, at least, I don't know for how many cycles, but it is completely free in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Completely
subsidized. Yeah.
So interesting. And how subsidized do you know is it in Australia? It's not
nowhere
subsidized.
near as subsidized. It's still a very big cost, and that's like one of the key barriers to access to ART in general. It's expensive, but compared to other countries like America and even like lots of parts of Europe, the fact that we have any subsidy at all and reasonable like geographical access to clinics, it's better in Australia than most other countries.
I mentioned in the last episode that ICSI, or intracytoplasmic sperm injection, is often kind of considered the gold standard when treating male factor infertility. So to recap in simple terms, it's when a single sperm is directly injected into an egg. And that kind of bypasses the natural process where many sperm compete to fertilize it. And it was originally developed as a solution for when sperm might struggle to fertilize an egg on their own. So even though male factor infertility only accounts for about 30% of IVF cases, ICSI now makes up over 50% of ART cycles in Australia. So more than half the time, clinics are using ICSI even when sperm quality isn't necessarily the issue. And if we look internationally, the numbers are even more striking. More than 2/3 of assisted reproductive technology cycles are ICSI.
Yeah, I'm looking at the graph I made now.
Tell us about it.
Oh, mate. So just to be clear about our comments before of, wow, if only someone had done a comparison. I did the comparison. It's been years of my life. Not to make it sound bleak. I love what I do. But it took a long time. So pretty much I did a study which hopefully will be published very soon. And what I did was I collected data from these ART reporting bodies all over the world, and then combined all the data together and looked at trends across the different countries in ICSI and lots of other techniques as well, like different freezing technologies, which I believe Lachlan's going to talk about in a future episode. There's a lot there to talk about, so that's got to be its own episode. But essentially, looking at the combined global trends of ICSI use, so just to clarify, this is cycles that have successfully reached egg collection, and then those eggs have been fertilized. So now we pretty much only have ICSI and IVF. We used to have other methods as well. Those have become less popular over time, and I don't really think it's worth getting into them. But with ICSI, globally, the transition, they were exactly equivalent. IVF and ICSI were exactly equivalent in the year 2000. So that's how quickly ICSI came to rise. It actually started out like in the very early 90s. Before that, it was like heaps of IVF. And then, so in 10 years' time, it caught up to the rates of IVF.
Wow.
And then since then, we now globally see, about 70% of all cycles are using ICSI, which is insane, because that does not reflect at all the reason for using ICSI, which is severe male factor infertility. So sperm that are really dysfunctional. We do not have that many dysfunctional sperm in the world yet. I say yet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So when like these sperm, or when sperm have normal counts and they're otherwise healthy, to my knowledge, ICSI doesn't actually improve the rates of becoming pregnant when compared to IVF. So why are we seeing such a steep increase in uptake?
Yeah, so that's true. So there are some really good studies that have compared the use of ICSI in patients who have like severe male factor infertility, which refers to or like defects in sperm function, versus patients that don't have that, but they've all used ICSI, and they consistently find that ICSI is literally only beneficial. It only helps the people, funnily enough, that the technology was made to help, which is the people who their sperm are not going to fertilize an egg on their own. Then they've done studies comparing people who have used ICSI and IVF, and with mild or no male factor infertility, and they perform exactly the same.
Wow.
There is literally no advantage. And from a biologist's perspective, IVF is the way better option to start out with. Is actually my opinion that IVF should be a mandatory first cycle, unless it is clear that the severe male factor infertility is in the equation. So yeah, I actually think that there should have to be evidence of a failed IVF cycle before you can do ICSI.
Wow.
Yes. And to answer your question of why are we seeing such increased rates of ICSI, I think there are a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, the ART industry is a business that is trying to sell success. And so it's my feeling that they are trying to minimize how many cycles they have to do for a patient, which is, you know, in the patient's best interest and in everyone's best interest. We don't want patients to be doing 1 million cycles. So they skip the first, they skip doing IVF and they go straight to ICSI because there's this perception that it's more reliable. But in reality, it's not. As I just said before, we have evidence that shows it is not more reliable. And whatever reliability you think you're introducing by having a person physically inject the sperm into an egg, you're getting rid of by not being able to know if it's a good sperm. What does tell us if it's a good sperm? The egg's zona pellucida. So the whole point, like a really major sperm quality assessor, is the ability for the sperm to bind to the zona pellucida. So by bypassing that, you don't really know if that sperm could have done it on its own. Other reasons that ICSI is increasing is also with the increase in freezing technology and cryopreservation, that often does change the properties of the zona pellucida, making it harder. And so that can make it a lot harder for the sperm to bind. So that's another reason that they're using more ICSI. Apart from that, I think it's a lot to do with like standardizing procedures and just doing the same thing every time, kind of.
Yeah, for sure. And which is kind of like more marketing because ICSI comes at a higher price than IVF.
Oh, I didn't even think about it.
I think it's
Yes,
up
does.
to like $500 more expensive for ICSI than with regular IVF.
It 100% is more expensive. And I recall reading and writing about it also like using more resources. So it's also like, it's more expensive, it's using more resources, and it's not even better.
Yeah.
Biologically, it's worse.
Yeah. Which leads into my next point, which is like, you know, we're using these suboptimal, you know, techniques. So my next question is like, what does that kind of mean long term. And we have a couple of like studies and there is a bit of evidence on this, but the truth is we don't really know, because ICSI didn't really start to be widely used until the 90s, like you said, with a really rapid uptake and implementation, which means that the oldest people conceive this way. Mind you, there are millions of people that have been conceived using this technology now, but the oldest are only in their late 20s or early 30s. So there's not really a long enough window to fully understand the potential generational effects, whether it be, medical or developmental.
Yes. You're really tempting me to get into my doomsday ranting right now. But yeah, that's the case for most assisted reproductive technologies. The reality is they haven't been around for long enough. What we do know so far is that we are definitely starting to see, there is enough evidence to suggest that particularly ICSI is having, preliminarily, as we said, a lot of these people, if they're in their 20s and 30s, they haven't necessarily decided to have kids yet. Some of them have. But we are seeing that the male factor infertility is a bigger issue in these offspring, which makes complete sense, because if we're going to talk about natural selection or selecting for factors, if we're essentially like assisting, if we're using a average at best sperm, if we don't know it's super high quality, which we don't have any way of knowing that it's super high quality, that's going to pass on genes to make future offspring not maybe have super high quality sperm. And I'm talking a bit colloquially here, but that's the whole idea. It's like we're selecting for these traits of not amazing fertility. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're seeing so far. There are some other a lot of other preliminary findings, but I just want to highlight that any health effects we wouldn't necessarily expect to see in young humans that are meant to be at the peak of their health and growth. We still have a lot to observe as humans age as a result of these technologies.
So I guess since the rollout of ICSI, we've seen, like you've said, these studies suggesting poor health, but it also subjects eggs and embryos to more cellular stress than with typical IVF, which can again lead to poorer quality embryos, and then that can be another kind of source of these health impairments that can last into adulthood.
You're right, it does. So that's another thing, because ICSI is it's literally more invasive, like you're injecting something into a cell. Just that additional handling of the cells, like having to move the egg around, position it right, then stab it, and then, move it again. All of that, you're increasing the physical stress, the oxidative stress in the cell.
So while ICSI's kind of become the dominant technology in ART cycles worldwide, it also represents a lot of uncertainty in reproductive medicine. And while it may have some short-term benefits within the IVF clinic, the full story is still unfolding, and no one can say for sure, as of yet, what the long-term impact or outcome of that will be.
I might just add a little positive note.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing in Australia and New Zealand a really solid effort to reduce our rates of ICSI use. Mm-hmm. So in the last 10 years, they actually peaked 10 years ago in 2015-ish, and they have reduced almost 10% in the last 10 years, which is a really good effort. Mm-hmm. Other countries have not done that, just to be flat out. And I think it's being more recognised now that we need to start doing something. But yeah, no, Australia and New Zealand are doing a really great job. We seem to be often setting the example, leading by example.
And that's about all we have time for today. Thanks so much, Alex, for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Make sure to stick around for next time, where we'll be diving into IVF add-ons, what they are, and whether they really offer any benefit. And if you like this episode, be sure to listen to our other series, Unwrapped Bite-Sized Sex Ed, Busting Fertility Myths, Plastics and Fertility, and Fertility and Aging. So stay tuned for more episodes on the Eggsperts.
Bye-bye.
Ciao for now.